Well, hi there, it's Polly here with Mr. Snoots, continuing our trans history project. Now, it's dire times, and I will get on to some deeper sort of histories, but I wanted to give you a bit of fun, and for that, I want to talk about one of my favourite figures from trans and intersex history. Now, a word beforehand, we have to be careful when we are constructing history not to claim people from the past under banners of things that we kind of want to channel them into today. So with transgender people, there are some people now, and indeed as in the past, who were honestly, what you would call under the old sense transvestites, a male who would occasionally dress as a woman. There were sincere transgender people who at some point in their lives wished to change from one gender to another. There were intersex people who were trying to figure out exactly what they were and sometimes moving from one to another or embracing both. So it is a complex thing. Now, our subject for tonight, I will be using all sorts of different pronouns for, but appropriate to the period of life that they were in at the time. I want to talk to you about the Chevalier D Eon. Now, I am a 18th century and 17th century historian. That is my particular thing. For those of you who haven't seen it, go see the TV series Versailles, which has the Duc d'Orléans, the wonderfully cross-dressing brother of Louis XIV. You also need to see the Anthony Andrews Scarlet Pimpernel, which is magnificent. Anthony Andrews as the Scarlet Pimpernel, head of the fashionable set. Cinquemare, fantastic. A young Ian McKellen as the evil Chevalier, head of the Committee of Public Safety. 30-year-old Ian McKellen could have destroyed your life, I assure you. Oh my God. But anyway, Mr. Student, stop sniffing my hormones. So, in the early years of the 18th century, in the 1720s, D'Eon was born into a small family in the lower French nobility. Now you've got to understand, French nobility at the time swarmed the earth like ants. There were so many kind of minor nobles, it was very, very hard to find employment for everyone. You would get fashionable regiments where the privates in the regiment were actually technically nobles. There's also a system of venality, which is purchasing and bribing officials and so on. So if you wanted a job, you bribed an official and paid for it. Something that the USA is very familiar with right now. It's illegal everywhere else except Russia. But in any case, so young D'Eon was born into this family and was presented to the world as male. And immediately shone. D'Eon was obviously incredibly personable, very lively, very witty, highly, highly, highly intelligent, and at an early age actually wrote some treatises on financial management and financial reform, which in that incredibly tricky period where they're trying to move France from this kind of horrible, venal, medieval, bribery-infested system to something that was more suitable for an expanding state that's starting to sort of try and edge into the very beginnings of Industrial Revolution. These were important. So D'Eon managed to get a job with the regional provincial financial manager and did extremely well. So well that they came to the attention of the financial ministers that were for Paris, and the central polity of France was brought in as an assistant to the Ministry of Finance there, and did really, really well. Seems to have been a very personable fellow. At this point, that gets them access to the court of Louis XV And this is where it starts to get interesting. So Deon, not a Chevalier yet, just Deon, manages to get a weird little job with the court as a royal censor, the royal censor, in fact. Now, what this job entails is the courts at this time had official biographers and official historians who would run around and write down what happened each day, but also members of the court would keep diaries, write letters, write their own histories, and the Crown was constantly spying on everyone's letters and copying them out and so forth. And so Deon's job was to basically comb through a lot of this stuff and look for anything that would reflect badly upon the Crown. And I have no proof for this, but given later behaviour, I'm pretty damn sure Deon found some stuff and it didn't go into a fireplace at all. I think Deon kept it because it resurfaces later. But in this process, Deon has very close connections to King Louis XV. And Deon joins a group called the King's Secret. Now, this is basically James Bond territory. This is a secret organisation of secret agents who are responsible only to the king. Only the king knows who they are. They report to the king. There's no governance except the king. So, Deon has access to Louis XV. Now, the weird thing about the King's Secret, as the organisation was called, is that Louis actually got his own secret foreign policy, which is often completely at odds with official French foreign policy. So you've actually got like a diplomatic corps and so on that are pursuing one course of action, and Louis got his secret agents working for something either against them or just completely out there. So there has been a war, the War of the Austrian Succession, which is in the 1740s. It's over the fact that a woman, alas, has taken over as the heir to the Austrian throne, and she's running that country really well, thank you. The French are looking for an alliance with Russia. Russia is now ruled by Catherine the Great. Fantastic woman. Forget that absolute nonsense about her shagging horses. That is literally something designed by bigots to tear her down. She was an excellent ruler. During her reign, no one was executed in Russia. She was completely against it. She reformed their laws, reformed the army, did social reforms, and if you do courses on enlightened rulers, which I did, her name is consistently left out every time because she's a woman. So, screw traditional teaching courses on 18th century history. I'm going to put Elizabeth the Great down as an enlightened ruler. A woman of the Enlightenment indeed. Damned clever. But here's the thing. There was an English faction at the court. And these guys were closing off access to the Queen. The French wanted to get some closer contact with that Queen, but the English were blocking off any access except for children and women. So, the French sent an official ambassador out, because everyone has an ambassador. Deon, as a member of the King's Secret, accompanies that ambassador, ostensibly as an assistant. Now, here's where it gets to a slight point of contention. Deon, in Deon's own writing, says, since the English faction had managed to get court support and so forth, and lots of advisors, they were blocking off all close personal access to the Queen except for women and children. Deon dressed flawlessly as a woman, passed completely as a woman, and got past those barriers. And let's be clear, this is actual dagger in the back stuff. Had Deon been caught, that other faction would have assassinated him. Or in this case, her. Now, there's no evidence for any of this other than Deon's own writing, but given what happened later in Deon's life and Deon's behaviour, I am very willing to believe it. Deon, as a French woman brought through to the court, became part of the Queen's circle, ladies in waiting. Doesn't mean you're hanging out with the 27. She has a lot of these, but it does mean he's got an ear to what's going on, and was a major, major part of that whole secret diplomatic effort to forge an alliance with the Russian throne. And the reason I think, honestly, as a historian, that this is true is that Dion was rewarded very, very handsomely for her efforts. When this ambassadorial job was over, Dion was given a substantial pension and was actually made a captain of dragoons, which is a real jump from nothing, nix, nada. That's actually like a pretty boom captain. Normally you have to buy a captain's commission, and it cost tens of thousands of pounds or louis d'or. Dan would never have been able to afford it, but boom. So the 7 Years' War happens. The French and Russian alliance is a thing. The English actually send armies onto the continent in support of the Prussians, who are under Frederick the Great, who was a complete twant of a human being, who has a propaganda arm that makes him look like a super soldier. I assure you he was not. But the French fought several battles against the English and the Prussians, but mostly their old foes, the English. Dion performed with great heroism in one of these. In another, performed with great heroism and was very, very honourably wounded, was mentioned in dispatches and was made a Chevalier of France, which is basically, boom, you are fully knighted, mate. Living as a man at this point. Dion is then sent at the end of the war to England as part of the negotiation team to negotiate the peace treaty. Sent over there with one other person, the official ambassador, and he's there as part of the negotiating team. And here's where it gets really wacky. For some reason, Dion is just adopted by the upper class set, and indeed the lower class set in London, as an absolute icon. They adored him. Obviously, Dion was witty, pretty, height of fashion, apparently quite funny, but could make many off-coloured jokes. I described him as being able to swap a quip with the nobles or curse like a grenadier. But was very famous for cross-dressing fluidly at parties. Now, these parties are in the inner, most fashionable set. Now, when the whole treaty is done, the official ambassador goes home and Dion is left as the representative of the French court in England. Now, as part of the king's secret, still, Dion has secret instructions. Louis XV is trying to scope out England for potential invasion. This is a private project of the crown, and had he consulted with anyone, they would have given it a firm no. But Dion is sent correspondence from the crown saying, I want you to spy out English defences, coastal fortifications, garrison strengths, current fleet strengths, the whole thing. Dion seems to actually have kind of held off on the project because was living happily in England, in society, great pensions coming in from France, able to support a lavish, lavish lifestyle because the Chevalierhood had its own pension. The pension from the Russian spy mission was still going great. And yeah, fantastic, great days. So suddenly there's some rain on the parade. Now, Dion seems to have been quite a fencer, by the way, and as someone that is, frankly, also quite a fencer, as a trans woman, yeah, my fencing skills have saved my life more than once, I'm not joking, but Dion seemed to be in much the same position. Actually seemed to teach fencing and gave many fencing exhibitions, was quite an expert, continued to give exhibitions of fencing into her old age. And there are some quite famous paintings and engravings of her doing exactly that in front of Prinny, George, eventually George IV, the Prince Regent. So she ends up as part of that fast set. If you've seen the Scarlet Pimpernel, that's the Prinny. These are in later days though. So what happens is, suddenly, an official French ambassador is sent. Now, there are court factions in France. D'Eon is not part of either of these. D'Eon, as part of the King's Secret, is doing something entirely different. Answers to King Louis entirely. But Madame du Pompadour, who had been the King's senior mistress and remained the King's favourite, had a huge network. Again, there's that venality inside of bribery and so on. She stays rich by raking in bribes and placing people in positions of power. There was a competing group which had some other senior ministers who were also raking in money, putting competing people into positions of power. So these two factions are dagger in the back fighting each other. Pompadour has managed to get a ambassador sent to England because D'Eon doesn't count as an official ambassador. He is a representative of the court, basically with no portfolio. He is absolutely ropeable when this bloody horrible new ambassador arrives. No one likes this guy. Apparently he was a total twant, but he's the official one. And so it begins this kind of tug of war between them because D'Eon is really popular. So you can approach the ambassador and you can go through all kinds of red tape. Or you can go D'Eon, who can get it done. Mates rates, he'll get it done for you. And so the ambassador really hates him to an extent where D'Eon is invited to a private dinner where they're supposed to be sorting out their differences. And D'Eon revealed that the ambassador tried to poison him. D'Eon fled for his life. These people are actually trying, and here's where it starts to get sort of interesting. D'Eon actually fled into the country in Surrey and flawlessly lived as a woman for a year. No one suspected, just living there as a woman, while she now laid other plans, because she's got the correspondence. Now, what she does is, after laying down her protections over the year, she then comes bursting out, takes the French ambassador to court for attempting to poison her, and this becomes the cause célèbre of the age. It's hard to communicate in this day and age how amazing this was. This incredibly popular person around the town, which it looks like the middle class and everyone, just the gentry in London, had seen this person coming back and forth, and occasionally dressed as a male or a female and just accepted for it. They actually had sort of adopted D'Eon as like a real kind of media celebrity figure. This media celebrity figure says that the French ambassador has tried to poison them, and they've got correspondence from their spy network where this person has said, I am going to try and poison this person. This was the absolute lightning of the age. People were crowded into the courtroom just to hear each day of this court case, and at the end of it, people are racing out, writing out the days happening in the court case, which goes to everyone. The whole country is listening into this, bated breath. It's just everywhere. It's all anyone talks about. It's the thing. It eventually comes to a point where D'Eon then publishes a book. And this is a book of much of the secret correspondence that they've been given, which shows that D'Eon has been given a series of secret instructions from the French crown, which D'Eon has not obeyed. No, I will not spy upon the English. And more letters and so on from the French crown saying, do it or we'll cut off your pension, and him saying, no, I will not. This becomes quite a sensation, as you can understand. This is the Watergate of its age. This is the scandal. British and French relations which had been repairing go to pieces. And this is very important for the American War of Revolution. This is where a lot of that entente cordiale that has been built just fractures as this incredible document comes out showing that the French have been doing up to skullduggery this whole time. But D'Eon, as I said, both pretty, witty and wise, hasn't published all the documents. The most damning ones D'Eon has kept, and in private correspondence threatens to make those public. In other words, if I accidentally fall out of a window onto half a dozen bullets, or accidentally somehow manage to cut my own head off while shaving, these letters will automatically be published. That's the arrangements they made. And I think, cannot prove, but it feels to me like there might even have been some things from those earlier archives, because whatever this was brought Louis XV screeching to a halt and begins to make a treaty with D'Eon. Now, at the age of 49, D'Eon has suddenly begun making a switch. More and more often, D'Eon is in women's clothing and presenting as a woman. The arrangement that it comes to with the Crown is that the pensions will stay in place. There will be a substantial payment of lands and so forth to essentially buy D'Eon off. This correspondence will remain miraculously hidden unless D'Eon happens to accidentally explode. But D'Eon must come back from England. They've had enough of D'Eon being in England. But that's okay, thinks D'Eon. We'll head back. Now, there's two versions of the next story. The one that you will see on Google and so forth will tell you that the Crown demands that D'Eon come back, but that D'Eon can only come back if D'Eon lives as a woman. However, from the letters and so on that D'Eon has published, it actually looks like D'Eon is actually living as a woman already, and in fact demands that she be recognised as a woman. So in writing, the French Crown recognises D'Eon as a woman. D'Eon comes back, finds that the deal was actually not straight. They were indeed given their pensions and so on, but they were sort of confined away from Paris and so on, where they could cause trouble, and essentially exiled to the country. You don't come into the cities, you weird witch. But when the American Revolution happened, D'Eon had become quite a Republican through these last few years. And you can see it, those early days fighting against venality and corruption in finances and so forth, being caught in all this skullduggery and seeing how readily the Crown will work against the actual interests of founded government, was obviously a huge thing in changing D'Eon from a French monarchy loyalist to an out-and-out revolutionary. But D'Eon offered to general the French troops that would be sent to America to assist the Americans in their revolution against the English. And D'Eon was refused because D'Eon, now officially a woman, could not qualify as a general in the French army, period. So they were stuck. The deal had gone sour. The Crown started reneging on the pensions, so D'Eon secretly fled straight back to England, where she was welcomed with open arms. D'Eon continued living in Britain as a woman, and by this stage, the Prince Regent and so on in the 1780s becomes a thing. His extravagant lifestyle and his party set, and there's D'Eon, now an older woman, but still this extravagant figure, this witty, funny, strange person, this person in lace dresses and so on, who will happily whip out a sword and beat all comers in the middle of the court, is this extraordinary figure in that fast set. Now, here's where some other troubles begin, because she's now cut off from all of her pensions. So she's making some money actually by these fencing exhibitions and as a fencing tutor, but being in that fast set is running up debts. She does end up in debtor's prison, which is a very common thing at the time, and gets sprung out by some people paying off most of those debts. Tries to threaten the French crown with publishing more documents, but this doesn't work. And it doesn't work because the French Revolution comes crashing in. D'Eon is actually quite enthusiastic for those early glory days of the French Revolution and offers to general French troops that are fighting against the Austrians. It's actually considered by the French, but again, she is officially a woman, so therefore you cannot lead armies of France. The debts are mounting up a bit and life's getting harder to live in England. So eventually D'Eon does actually go back to revolutionary France. And it's funny because as one of the noblesse, as a noble and like a war hero of France, you'd think she might have been in a certain amount of danger from like the Committee of Public Safety, but wasn't. Seemed to be a bit of a cause célèbre for having basically held King Louis's feet to the fire over all these documents. So D'Eon actually lived to be, I believe, 80, which is a phenomenal thing for the 18th century. Her last 4 years of life she was ill. She had a fall, as many old people do, and damaged her spine, so spent the last 4 years of her life basically bedridden, but died an 80-year-old woman in France, having lived as a woman since the age of 49. So for the last 31 years of her life, lived as a woman. Now, when she died, there was a post-mortem of her body, and this was published throughout France and throughout England because she was still remembered with much interest, even though she disappeared for 20-odd years. It was found that the Chevalier D Eon had perfectly functional male genitals, but also had full female breasts. So D Eon was what we would consider now, I guess, to be intersex. But like many intersex people, had gone between genders, wondering where they belonged. In the end, D Eon seems to have claimed womanhood. Okay, so a bit of a serpentine character, obviously a wit, obviously cut quite a figure, obviously about as trustworthy as a 3-franc note. An interesting figure, a colourful figure, and she's ours. She's one of us. She is intersex. She's one of our LGBTQ umbrella. She is the I in LGBTQI. It's a fun story, it's a lovable story, and it's here to remind us all where we've come from. The Chevalier D Eon. Now, when the early sexologists are starting to try and figure out a name for transgenderism, the term they chose was Aeonism, in memory of the Chevalier D Eon. So anyway, cheers everybody. Look after yourselves. If you're transgender, be visible. Be proud of who you are. Fear nothing. Be yourself. We're standing with you. Anyway, look after yourselves, and we shall see you with more strange little tidbits from history. Okay, cheers.